Picture this. It's October 1962, and the whole world is holding its breath. People are going to work, kids are in school, radios are buzzing with news updates, but behind the surface, humanity is standing inches away from the edge of nuclear war. The United States and the Soviet Union, two giants with thousands of warheads, are locked in a showdown that could wipe out civilization with a single mistake. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and trust me, it's more intense than any movie you've ever watched. But let's rewind a bit. In 1959, Fidel Castro and his revolutionaries overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. At first, Castro was celebrated as a hero of independence. But things changed fast. He started seizing American businesses, pushing land reforms, and most importantly, he leaned toward the Soviet Union. For the United States, this was a nightmare. Just 90 miles from Florida, a communist government was suddenly planted right in America's backyard. Washington wasn't about to sit still. In 1961, the CIA trained Cuban exiles and launched the Bay of Pigs invasion, hoping to overthrow Castro. It was supposed to be quick and decisive. Instead, it was a humiliating disaster. The invaders were crushed, Castro came out stronger than ever, and the US looked weak on the world stage. For Castro, it confirmed one thing: America would never stop trying to take him down. And for Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, it opened the perfect door. Here's the situation. The Soviet Union was behind in the nuclear arms race. The US had hundreds of nuclear missiles in Europe and Turkey aimed right at Moscow. The Soviets, they had far fewer that could hit American cities. So Khrushchev thought, why not change the game? Why not secretly place nuclear missiles in Cuba? If they pulled it off, they'd put almost every major US city within striking distance. Washington, New York, Chicago, all just minutes away from annihilation. And so, in the summer of 1962, Soviet ships began slipping into Cuban ports. On board were long crates, heavy machinery, and military advisors. In remote fields across Cuba, construction began. To the casual eye, it might have looked like just more military activity. But on October 14th, a U-2 spy plane flying over the island captured something shocking: photographs of nuclear missile sites nearly ready to go live. When those photos landed on President John F. Kennedy's desk, the room went cold. These weren't rumors, this was proof. Nuclear weapons were practically in America's front yard. Kennedy immediately called together his top advisors, the so-called ex-com. Generals, intelligence chiefs, cabinet members, the best minds in the country gathered to answer one terrifying question: what do we do now? The options were brutal. Some pushed for airstrikes, bombed the sites before they could launch. Others wanted a full-scale invasion to wipe out Castro once and for all. But there was a problem. What if Soviet soldiers were killed in the attack? What if Khrushchev retaliated in Berlin, or even worse, by firing nuclear missiles at the US? Suddenly, the nightmare of World War III was no longer abstract. It was on the table. After days of heated debate, Kennedy made a bold choice. Instead of bombing Cuba, the US would impose what he called a quarantine. In simpler terms, a naval blockade. American warships would surround Cuba, stopping and inspecting any Soviet ship carrying military equipment. The goal was simple: freeze the situation, stop more missiles from arriving, and force Khrushchev to think twice. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on live television. Millions of Americans sat glued to their screens as he calmly told the nation what had been discovered. His words were chilling: nuclear missiles in Cuba, aimed at the US, and a quarantine now in place. He warned that any launch from Cuba would be treated as an attack on the United States, and it would trigger massive retaliation. Think about what that felt like for ordinary people. Families sat around their TVs in silence. Kids practiced duck and cover drills at school. Parents quietly built bomb shelters in their backyards, filling them with canned food and water. People genuinely thought they might not live to see another week. Meanwhile, Soviet ships were already on their way. American destroyers and aircraft carriers lined up in the Atlantic, ready to intercept them. The world's eyes turned to the ocean. Would the Soviets back down, or would a single shot at sea start a nuclear war? And that's where the clock began ticking. For the next 13 days, the planet stood on the edge of history. As the blockade, or quarantine, as Kennedy carefully called it, went into effect, the tension skyrocketed. The U.S. Navy stretched across the Atlantic, radar screens glowing, radios crackling with constant updates. Soviet ships carrying unknown cargo steamed toward the line. The question on everyone's mind was simple: who's going to blink first? Inside the White House, Kennedy and his advisors were glued to every report. If a Soviet ship tried to break through, the U.S. Navy would have to stop it, maybe even fire. And if shots were fired, Khrushchev might respond with force. That could mean missiles launched from Cuba, bombs dropped on Europe, or even nuclear strikes against American soil. Every hour that passed felt heavier than the last. Then something unexpected happened. The first Soviet ships approaching the blockade slowed down. Some even turned around. For a moment, it looked like Khrushchev might be backing off. But it wasn't that simple. U.S. intelligence confirmed that the missiles in Cuba were still there, still being prepared. The danger hadn't passed, it had just shifted. On October 24th, the world truly held its breath. A confrontation at sea seemed minutes away, but the Soviet ships carrying the most dangerous cargo stopped short. It was a sign. Khrushchev wasn't ready to cross the line. Still, the standoff continued. Then came October 27th, a day historians now call Black Saturday. That morning, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. In the ex-com room, Kennedy's generals erupted. This was an act of war, they argued. Retaliation was necessary. But Kennedy, calm and calculating, resisted. He knew striking back might set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. Meanwhile, secret negotiations were unfolding behind the scenes. Khrushchev sent letters to Kennedy, some emotional, pleading for peace, others stern and threatening. The messages seemed almost contradictory, as if he himself was torn between war and compromise. At the same time, Robert Kennedy, the president's younger brother, met privately with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. The talks were delicate, walking a razor's edge. Finally, a deal began to take shape. Khrushchev would remove the missiles from Cuba. In return, the U.S. would promise not to invade Cuba and quietly agree to remove American missiles from Turkey, which were aimed at the Soviet Union. It was a trade-off, but one that allowed both sides to save face. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle the missile sites and return the weapons home. The crisis was over. Across the globe, people breathed a sigh of relief. The world had just come within inches of nuclear war and somehow stepped back. But the story doesn't end there. The Cuban Missile Crisis left a permanent mark on history. For Kennedy, it was a moment of leadership that defined his presidency. For Khrushchev, it was a gamble that nearly destroyed him politically. And for the rest of humanity, it was a wake-up call. The illusion of safety was gone. People now understood just how fragile peace really was and how close we had come to losing it all. In the years that followed, both superpowers took small steps to prevent such a nightmare from happening again. A direct hotline was installed between Washington and Moscow, the famous red phone, so leaders could talk instantly during crises. Nuclear test ban treaties were signed, and slowly, the idea of arms control began to take root. Yet the lesson of 1962 still echoes today. Technology may change, politics may shift, but the danger of miscalculation, of leaders pushing too far, remains. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a reminder of how thin the line is between survival and destruction. And maybe, just maybe, that's the reason the world remembers those 13 days so vividly. Because for less than 2 weeks, humanity stared into the abyss, and somehow chose to turn back. 13 days, two superpowers, one small island, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just history, it was a warning. A reminder that in the age of nuclear weapons, peace is never guaranteed, and survival depends on the choices of a few. Choices that, even today, could decide the fate of us all.